function keys are great to use for custom keyboard shortcuts because they don't need any additional keys. So you don't have to add Command or Shift or Alt or Option. You just simply press a function key to access any of the features available in Photoshop. The Edit Keyboard Shortcuts is the area where you can set up your custom shortcuts, and it's good to save them as a separate set, because the default ones you will always be able to go back to, and then it's just good to have something saved as a set for yourself. There are a couple of things I mentioned in other tutorials here on Tuts Plus, like edit, step backward and forward, which I have function key 1 and 2. And there's a couple of other things that I'm not going to repeat in this tutorial, but it's worth checking out. I've included a link for that tutorial if you want to check them out. So once you come here and set up a keyboard shortcut, it will be applied to any of the features that you choose for the application menus, panel menus, or tools. And it's also good to know that if you are a Mac user, you will have to make sure that in the settings, you go to keyboard, so in the system preferences, and here you choose keyboard and check use all function keys as standard function keys. Just make sure you have that option on, otherwise you won't be able to use these type of keyboard shortcuts. So first of all, I would like to show you that for F3, I have the Show Hide Layers option set up, which you will find under the layer options in the application menus. And it's under here, we just have to scroll down almost all the way to the bottom. That's Hide Layers. So that's F3, which is very useful. It's a two-way thing. You can hide or show layers. And I have another feature, which is using the F3, but together with Command. So Command F3 is set to Select Isolate Layers, which is going to be in the Select menu. So Select, and here you can see Isolate Layers. So these two features are actually quite close in what they do. That's why I set both of them on F3. And let's see how they work. So if I select any of these layers, let's just say the grass, which I can turn on and off, or I can press F3 to hide it or show it again. I can select any layers together and use the same feature to turn it quickly on and off. So that's a very useful feature. And Command F3 would be to isolate any of these layers. So for example, I want to work with some of these layers, maybe the middle grass, which is that one there. If I go into this and I select these layers and I press Command F3, it will quickly isolate these layers and I will only see them in my layers panel. So again, that's another quite useful feature to make it easier to find out what you have in your layers panel. And when you are ready with the isolation, you just press Command F3 again to switch back to normal mode and turn off the isolation. So once again, these are the features I showed you. One of them was from the layer menu, hide layers, and the other one is from the select menu, isolate layers. An essential part of working non-destructively in Photoshop is using smart objects, and for that I have my own keyboard shortcuts as well. To convert something to a smart object, I just simply have to press F5, and to edit its contents, I have Command F5. So once again, using the same function key for two different things, and you can find these options in the layer menu. So here, first of all, we have smart objects, convert to smart object, which is F5, and then edit contents with Shift F5. So let me show you how it works. If I select one of these layers, let's just say this squirrel here, if I go into the chipmunk and there is the layer, if I press F5, it quickly turns it into a smart object, and then if I press Command F5, then I can edit its contents, which opens up the source file of the smart object. When I change something on it, maybe I just rotate it around or flip the layer horizontally, which is again a keyboard shortcut I mentioned in an earlier tutorial. I've set that up for F4, and that's under the Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. So once I do that, I can save it and then close it and go back, and we can see the chipmunk is already turned around. So these two keyboard shortcuts make it much faster to work with smart objects in Photoshop. The most important panel in Photoshop is probably the Layers panel, but immediately after that, there's two which you should use all the time, and they are the Adjustments panel and the Properties panel. Now, these are usually the best to keep close to the Layers panel because there will be lots of things that you will have to use together with that panel. But it's also useful to hide these whenever they are not needed. Because as you can see, if I have the Properties panel selected, it will take a lot of space out from the Layers panel. So if I want to hide it, I can always double click on it like this. But it's also good to set up a keyboard shortcut for them. And what I use is F7 function key for Adjustments panel and F8 for Properties. So even without clicking on them, I can quickly select any of the two from the keyboard or press the same keys to hide them. So if I have the Properties panel, which is assigned to F8, now if I press F8 again, it will hide them completely. So whenever I need them next time, I can just press whichever panel I need. So F8 to bring back the properties again, and it automatically comes with the Adjustments panel. So I can very quickly switch to that as well. So hiding and showing each of these panels is very easy. Once you set up these keyboard shortcuts, from the window menu, there's Properties panel and Adjustments. So F7 and F8 are my preferred keyboard shortcuts for these two panels. Another feature in Photoshop, which is very useful to set up as keyboard shortcut, is the Arrange options for Windows. So whenever you have several documents open, like here, you can see them as tabbed documents, but you can also see them tiled. And that option you will find under the Arrange, Window Arrange, and there is the Tile option, which you can select and then see everything together. And then another option to switch back to the tabs mode is the Consolidate All to Tabs. And I have keyboard shortcuts set up for these. If I go back, you can see them. Command F is for tiling, and then Command Shift F is to consolidate all to tabs. So let's just see this again. If I press Command F, I switch to the tiling option, and then I select any of these images, and I press Command Shift F, I will switch back to the tabs mode. Now Command F is the keyboard shortcut by default set to the last or previously used filter. That's something I don't really use that often because I don't repeat using the same filter all the time. I usually use lots of different filters, so I don't really make most of this keyboard shortcut, which is a very easy one to use. So I rather use it for this more important and more commonly used feature, tiling and setting everything back to tabs. But if you prefer to use another keyboard shortcut, of course you can set them up the way you want them to be, and you can also use keyboard shortcuts for any of these different arrangements for the windows. Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud came with a new filter called the Camera Raw filter, and with this you can assign all of the features from the Adobe Camera Raw plugin onto any of your layers. On top of that, if you have a smart object and you apply the filter onto a smart object, it will become completely non-destructive and will become a smart filter. Now, there's one problem with this filter, and like most of the other filters, it's only working in RGB color mode. So you won't be able to use it if your color mode is CMYK. So what you can do to keep your document in CMYK mode but still be able to use the Camera Raw filter is to select the layer whichever you want to work with, like in this case the clouds, and turn it into a smart object. I'm going to press my keyboard shortcut, my custom keyboard shortcut F5 to set it to a smart object, and then press Command F5 to go into and edit the contents of this smart object. Now that we are in the source of the smart object, we can switch this image to RGB. So inside the smart object, we change to RGB, and now we can use the camera raw filter. But before we do that, I'm going to turn the layer itself again into a smart object, just to keep everything completely non-destructive. And then I go to filter and camera raw filter. And this is the option that I want to set up as a custom keyboard shortcut, because this is again something that should be used most of the time, because it's an amazing filter. So I've set up Command Shift R for the filter. So now if I press that option, I will get the camera raw filter inside Photoshop, and here I can play around with the clouds. I can, for example, reduce the highlights a bit and increase the shadows, or maybe we can increase the clarity of the clouds and also a bit the vibrance, something like that. Let's see before and after. Yeah, that looks much better. And now I can click on OK. All the changes will be stored inside the smart object as a smart filter. All I need to do is just to save this and then go back to the other main image, which is still in CMYK, but inside that smart object we stored an RGB filter, the camera raw filter. So if I switch back and forth using step backward and forward, we can see how we improved the clouds in this image. Another useful feature is to switch between point and paragraph type. It's good to know that you can do these two things in Photoshop, and the way you differentiate what you want to create is by clicking or click and dragging with the type tool. So if I click and drag, that will design a paragraph text in which I can just simply start typing, and whenever I get close to the edge, Photoshop will automatically break the line for me. So that's paragraph type. And if I just simply click anywhere on my canvas, I can create a point type, which will never break the line automatically. I will have to press return to be able to start a new line in my text. So that's the way we create these two different types of text in Photoshop. But to be able to convert something that's already been created, there is a feature which is quite obscure. It's quite difficult to find it. But for example, this one here, DJ7, is a point type. And if I right click on this layer, then I will find the feature called Convert to Paragraph Text, or I can go to the Type menu and choose the same feature from there. But to make things easier, and if it's something that you would use a lot, then it's better to set up a custom keyboard shortcut. What I prefer to use is Command Shift P. So let's see how that works. If I have this selected, we can see that it is a point type. But if I press Command Shift P and select it again, now it became a paragraph type. Once again, if I press Command Shift P, it turned back into a point type. So it's very easy to use it, and I really like these type of keyboard shortcuts, which can be used in two different ways. So it can switch back and forth between two different stages. Like F3 will show or hide layers. Command F3 will start isolation, and then it will turn it off again. Command Shift P will turn a type into paragraph type or back to point type. So these are very useful keyboard shortcuts. And again, it's completely up to you what you use for it. I prefer Command Shift P for this feature. Whenever you work with lots of layers in Photoshop, you might feel like you need to select them all at once. And that would be very difficult because, as you can see, I have loads of layers here. So what I can do is use the feature called Select All Layers. Select All would just select simply the image itself, but Select All Layers will select all of the layers, and that's Command Alt A. That's the way you can very quickly select all of them. But to be able to deselect all the layers, you should also use another feature here in the Select menu, and that's the Deselect Layers. For that, there is no default keyboard shortcut, and I prefer to use Command Shift A, which is the same keyboard shortcut for deselecting everything in InDesign. So it's quite useful to use the same keyboard shortcut here in Photoshop. So let's see, if I press Command Shift A, it will deselect everything. And many times I feel like I have a couple of things selected, like let's say these, and I just want to make sure for whatever I'm going to use next, I don't have any of the layers selected. So again, Command Shift A will quickly deselect them. Another new feature in Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud is the option to be able to share your work immediately on Behance. So that's the option here, share on Behance. And for this, I would like to set up a keyboard shortcut, which will be very similar to saving. Save is obviously Command S. Save for web is another very useful keyboard shortcut, Command Shift S. But there's nothing using Command Alt Shift S, and that's what I would like to use for the share on Behance option. So let's just set that up quickly. So as you can see how to do that, File, and go down Share on Behance. I click here on the shortcut and press down the shortcut, accept it, and then save it into my preset. So I will store it in the yesamidesigner.com set, and then I'm going to click on OK. Now if I press that keyboard shortcut, I will get the Share on Behance dialog box immediately, and all I need to do from here is to quickly log in, if I haven't logged in before, to my Behance account, and then I just simply need to give it a title, tags maybe, and comment, and decide whether this is a new work or it's a revision of a previously uploaded work. So that's again a useful keyboard shortcut, similarly to saving your document or save it for web. Now we should think about sharing our work on Behance, and it's good to have a keyboard shortcut set up for that as well. We already found ways to quickly turn on and off layers or enter isolation mode and then turn it off again. But there is also a feature, again, quite hidden, which can turn off and on all the layer styles in your whole document immediately. So that option you will find under the layer menu, layer style, and there at the bottom you will find hide all effects. Once again, this is a cool feature because it works in two ways. So it can hide and show all the effects. So any layer style that you use, like drop shadows, overlays, inner glows, inner shadows, bevel and emboss strokes, so on and so forth, can be immediately turned off for all the layers in your document and then turned back on again. And the option that the keyboard shortcut that I've set for this, you could see it, but I show it again. If I go back here, is Command Shift H. So that's again something that used by default in Photoshop, but that feature is not really important for me. So instead of that, I use this keyboard shortcut for this feature. And let's see what happens. If I press Command Shift H, it hides all the layer styles from the document and then show them again if I press it again. So we can see how all the drop shadows and glows will disappear and then they come back again. I really like to use this option because in some cases I just apply loads of layer styles, and then once I get to the final stage of the image, I always check how it looks without and with all the layer styles on. And last but not least, I have a keyboard shortcut set up for one of the tools, and that's the Mixer Brush tool, which you will find under the brush tools. So this is the one, Mixer Brush tool. And as you can see, instead of the default B shortcut, I actually use N. And by default, this is set to one of the 3D tools. But because I don't really use much 3D in Photoshop, I could sacrifice that and use this shortcut instead of the 3D tool for the Mixer Brush tool. And the reason why I use N is because it's right next to B on the keyboard, so I can very quickly switch between the brush tool and the mixer brush tool. And that's the way you usually use this tool, because with the brush tool you create something, you draw something, and then with the mixer brush you can blend things together. So just to show you an example, I am going to draw here on the sky with the color. I'm just going to pick a color, let's just say this bright blue, and I'm going to use a soft edge on it, and I just quickly draw over the sky, a part like that. And then if I press N, I can quickly switch to the mixer brush tool, and with that I can blend the edges into the sky, and I can create my own custom cloud in the sky. So as you can see, it's a very useful tool. Obviously it needs a little bit more time to work with it, but I can quite quickly and easily create clouds as well as other things. But to have that flexibility to switch between these two tools by simply pressing B and then N is very useful. So again, something which is up to you how to use this, but it's good to have these two tools next to each other on the keyboard and be able to switch between them easily.